What's the most unexpected thing a judge said in your divorce that changed everything? I was sitting in that stifling courthouse, my back pressed so tightly against the wooden bench that I could feel every groove digging into my skin. My heart pounded in my chest like I was about to sprint a marathon, and all I could think about was how I ended up here, on this particular morning, about to witness one final twist I never saw coming. The judge was a tall, silver-haired man in a black robe who seemed about as emotionally involved as a brick wall. Yet for some reason, I couldn't shake the feeling that, in a matter of minutes, he would say something that would change me forever. Rachel sat on the opposite side of the aisle, clutching a thin manila folder, her knuckles nearly as white as the sheets of paper jammed inside it. I couldn't bring myself to look her in the eye, not today. I wanted to believe this was the worst day of my life, but the truth is, everything that really hurt me had been unraveling long before we ever set foot in a courtroom. And as the bailiff announced that Judge Williams was ready to proceed, my entire world seemed to hold its breath. I used to tell people our story started like a cheesy romantic comedy. We met in college, both pledging for the same volunteer group. I remember seeing her across the campus quad. Her hair was dyed a soft brown with these golden highlights that caught the sun in such a way it was almost blinding. Everyone told me Rachel was one of those genuinely warm people who remembered details about your life you barely remembered yourself. Back then, I was so shy that even making eye contact felt like an achievement. But with Rachel, everything felt easy. We joked about volunteering hours, complaining about the time slots that forced us to wake up too early on Saturdays. And soon we were grabbing coffee after class and swapping stories about our families. She had a younger sister named Christina, who lived on the East Coast, and they wrote each other letters because they thought texting was too impersonal. I loved that about Rachel. She carried an old soul with her, preferring to jot down her thoughts in notebooks rather than on social media. I think that's what first drew me to her. She had this thoughtful aura I found irresistible. It wasn't love at first sight, but it was close enough. By the end of sophomore year, we were inseparable. We'd hold study dates at my cramped dorm, cramming for finals while living off cheap takeout. My roommate Mike used to call us the perfect couple. I believed him. Sometimes, looking back, I wonder if it was our own illusions about what perfect meant that ultimately destroyed us. Because deep beneath that shiny exterior, Rachel and I both carried invisible baggage we never fully unpacked for each other. We got married in our mid-20s. It was a sunny day in late May, all bird chirps and blossoming flowers, our parents beaming with pride. I still remember walking down the aisle to stand under the old oak tree in my grandparents' backyard. That tree had been around for decades, and it felt symbolic somehow. A vow under something so strong and deeply rooted. I looked at Rachel, radiant in her simple white gown, her eyes shining with tears of happiness. If someone had told me then that we'd be in a courtroom years later, hurling accusations through our lawyers, I would have told them they were insane. We seemed destined for a different kind of life, the sort you see in photo albums and highlight reels. Smiling faces, holiday memories, shared dreams. But I guess nothing in life guarantees your illusions won't be shattered. Our first real crack in the facade came 2 years into the marriage when I lost my job at a tech startup. One day, the company folded unexpectedly, and I found myself standing in our living room, explaining to Rachel why our finances might be more precarious than we'd hoped. She tried to be understanding, but there was this flicker of worry in her face that I couldn't ignore. For a while, things were okay. We budgeted carefully, used some savings, and I spent my days sending out resumes like a machine. In hindsight, though, that was where something changed. The stress settled in the corners of our home like dust we never cleaned up. The tension was small at first. Little disagreements about our spending or about my lack of ambition, if I dared take a night off from job hunting to watch a movie. Then the arguments grew, heated and irrational, mostly fueled by fear. I remember the day she snapped at me for forgetting to unload the dishwasher. I knew it wasn't about the dishes, but I yelled back anyway. And for a split second I saw this raw hurt in her eyes, like she was watching the man she loved slip away from her. I landed another job eventually, but the rift between us was already forming. We pretended everything was fine on the surface, tried to cover up the cracks with new paint, so to speak. We even talked about starting a family at one point, but whenever the conversation edged too close to that topic, we'd veer off, uncertain. Then came the night that changed everything. The night she told me she needed to leave for a few days to clear her head. I was so angry I let her walk out without a fight. She stayed at her friend's place, and I spent those nights alone in our bed, swirling in confusion and bitterness. Somewhere along the line, I started throwing myself into work, taking on extra projects, staying late at the office. Rachel, on the other hand, took on part-time freelance gigs so she could focus on therapy sessions to deal with her anxiety and what she felt was the burden of our marriage. That's how she framed it one night. She confessed she felt burdened by my needs, my insecurities. I'm not proud of it, but I used that as a weapon in our fights for a long time. I'm sorry you married such a burden, I'd hiss when things got tense. It was cruel, I know, but we were both hurting and didn't know how to speak that pain in a healthy way. When we finally uttered the word divorce, Booker, it was more of a quiet admission than a screaming match. We were sitting at the kitchen table in silence, the overhead light flickering slightly, reminding us we had to change the bulb. Rachel had tears in her eyes, and my heart felt like it was being squeezed. "Ethan," she said softly, "I think we need to separate. For real this time." Part of me wanted to argue, to say we should try therapy together, but I was so tired. I felt I'd been pushing against a tidal wave for months, maybe even years, and I was ready to let the water swallow me. I just nodded. "Okay," I managed to say, my voice trembling. We decided to call an attorney the next day. Telling our families was the worst. My mom cried, blaming me for not working hard enough to fix things. Her father sent me a curt email, obviously upset I wasn't the husband he expected me to be. Rachel's sister, Christina, tried to remain neutral, but even she slipped once when she asked me point blank, "What did you do to push her away?" It stung like a wasp, and I had no real answer. There wasn't a single event or a single villain in this narrative. It was a messy unraveling made up of 1,000 small compromises we failed to make and resentments we failed to address. We hired our respective lawyers. Hers was a sharp-witted woman named Patricia, who had a reputation for going for the jugular in divorce proceedings. Mine was a calm, methodical guy named George, who told me from the start, "Don't expect this to be easy, even if you think you're both on the same page." He was right, of course. The moment the legalities began, it was like an invisible barrier shot up between Rachel and me. We stopped talking directly. Everything was filtered through attorneys. Letters, emails, phone calls scheduled at precise times. It felt surreal, like we had gone from being best friends to business adversaries. The first hearing was brutal. We sat in that same hushed courtroom, each accompanied by our lawyers, listing out assets and liabilities like we were enumerating grocery items. Marital property includes the house, the car, the checking account, the retirement fund, Patricia recited in that clipped voice. At some point, I glanced at Rachel, hoping for a moment of eye contact, but she was staring at the floor. Judge Williams was present at that hearing too, but he mostly listened, asked for clarifications, and set the next court date. Nothing shocking happened that day, just the slow, methodical destruction of a life we once shared. After that, things got worse. The house we bought together, the one we painted bright blue shutters on because we thought it looked cheerful, became a battlefield of who had invested more money, who had done more upkeep. Every memory we'd built was reduced to an item on a spreadsheet. My mother, in her misguided attempt to help, started digging up any evidence she could that showed how Rachel had failed. She presented me with screenshots of Rachel's social media posts, rumored messages with an old friend of hers named Ryan. I felt sick looking at them, not because they definitively proved any wrongdoing, but because it felt so invasive and petty. I knew I was no saint either. I had my share of flaws, my own fleeting emotional disconnections that might as well have been betrayals. We had no kids, something that might have simplified things on paper, but on an emotional level, it only reminded me we'd never built that family we once talked about. In one of our rare direct communications, I asked her if she ever regretted not trying harder to start a family before everything fell apart. She looked at me with this heartbreaking expression and said, "We already had too many cracks in the foundation, Ethan." I remember feeling my chest tighten at the thought of it. No future birthdays or graduations or bedtime stories, just us parting ways. As the next hearing date approached, I felt trapped in a nightmare that didn't want to end. My lawyer kept telling me to gather documents, bank statements, tax returns, to prove I was the one who contributed more financially when she took a step back to handle her anxiety. I couldn't believe I was stooping to that level, weaponizing her mental health struggle just so I wouldn't lose the house. But the bitterness was so deep by then, and the legal system practically encourages you to throw everything you have at each other. I tried to cling to some dignity, but it was slipping away like sand between my fingers. When the second hearing rolled around, tension hung thick in the air. This time, we brought up bigger issues. Who gets what portion of the 401k? How the spousal support would be calculated? All that adult stuff that never crosses your mind when you're a couple in love? Picking out curtains and dreaming of the future. I found myself shaking my head, wondering how we got here, how love could twist itself into this grotesque version of a financial inquisition. The judge listened, occasionally frowning, flipping through papers. I kept waiting for a moment of personal intervention, for him to say something human. But he remained professional, not giving away much. It was only after that hearing that I overheard Patricia speaking with another lawyer. He's a tough judge, but he's known for an occasional curveball in these cases. I didn't think much of it at the time. I was too focused on how, at one point, Rachel testified that I'd emotionally abandoned. It cut me to the core, hearing her say that out loud. Part of me wanted to stand up and scream, "You abandoned me too." But in court, your outburst is swallowed by formalities and glares from your counsel. That night I couldn't sleep. I started reliving every argument we ever had, every apology that went unsaid, every moment of laughter we'd lost. I had this memory of a summer day at the lake when Rachel ran into the water, fully clothed, because I dared her. She didn't have the guts. She splashed around, came up to me dripping and laughing, and I thought, I'll never stop loving this woman. Was it naive to think that kind of joy would last forever? Probably. But it was more real to me than all the depositions and signed affidavits in the world. I tried to see a therapist on my own, a man named Dr. Coleman who specialized in grief and relationship trauma. He asked me, if you had one chance to tell Rachel exactly how you feel, no lawyers, no judge, just you and her, what would you say? I broke down in tears right there in his office because I realized I didn't know. My anger and sadness were so tangled I couldn't form a coherent sentence. It was in that meltdown that I recognized how far gone we really were. When the day of the final hearing arrived, it felt like standing at the edge of a cliff. The courthouse was busy, echoing with footsteps and hushed voices. I remember the stale smell of old carpet mixed with coffee from the vending machine in the hallway. Rachel was already seated when I arrived, her lawyer whispering something to her. George patted my shoulder and muttered, "We got this," though I wasn't sure what this even was. The bailiff let us in, Judge Williams took his seat, and the lawyers began their final arguments. Patricia was relentless, insisting Rachel deserved a sizable portion of my assets because she had sacrificed her career to support my job search all those years ago. George countered with evidence that I had been the primary breadwinner once I found stable work. It felt like we were discussing two strangers, not the couple who used to dance in the kitchen to old jazz records. I noticed how rigid Rachel's posture was, her gaze never once drifting my way. My chest felt tight, and I couldn't help but wonder if she was as scared as I was. As the back and forth continued, Judge Williams asked a few questions here and there, mostly procedural. There came a point when both lawyers finished their spiels, and the judge let out a long, measured sigh. "I've heard the arguments," he said in a steady voice. Then he took off his glasses, set them down on his desk, and looked at me, then at Rachel. But before I make a final ruling, I want to try something a bit different. My heart nearly stopped. There was something in his tone that made me realize he was about to deviate from the script. He gestured for our lawyers to step back, which they did, albeit with confused looks. Then, addressing Rachel and me directly, he said, "I see a lot of divorces, and often it's about the money or the property or the kids. But you two don't have children, and the financial aspects are just a small part of a larger emotional battlefield. I want you each to tell me one thing you once loved about the other person, the thing you treasured the most before everything fell apart." A stunned silence fell over the courtroom. I could hear the shuffle of papers behind me as George shifted uncomfortably. Patricia opened her mouth as if to protest, but no words came out. Meanwhile, Rachel and I just stared at the judge, uncertain if this was a trick or some new legal strategy. "I'm waiting," Judge Williams said softly. "Let's start with you, Mr. Carter." He inclined his head. "Tell me something you loved about your wife." My throat went dry. I looked at Rachel, who finally lifted her eyes and met my gaze. It was the first time in months that we looked directly at each other without hatred or fear. I could see the flicker of the person I once knew. A million memories raced through my head. Her laughter, her empathy, her stubborn refusal to let me sulk in self-pity. I cleared my throat and my voice came out uneven. She always remembered the little things about me," I said, my breath trembling. "Like if I had a big presentation at work, she'd send me a silly text right before just to make me laugh. Or how she'd pick up my favorite cereal when we went grocery shopping, even if she hated the taste of it herself. She was thoughtful. I loved that about her." I glanced down, trying to hide the tears forming in my eyes. The judge nodded, then turned to Rachel. "Mrs. Carter, what's something you loved about your husband?" She swallowed, her cheeks flushing pink. She hesitated for a long moment, and I wondered if she had anything left to say. Then she spoke softly, her eyes glistening with tears. "He was patient," she began, voice trembling. "When we first started dating, I was so insecure about my anxiety, but he never made me feel broken. He'd stay up late, holding my hand, talking me through panic attacks. He made me feel safe." A wave of emotion washed over me, and I realized my hands were shaking. Judge Williams took a moment to let the silence settle. Then he sighed. "It seems to me," he said gently, "that the real tragedy here is how two people who once saw the best in each other have become so wrapped up in their own pain that they forgot those good qualities. I can finalize this divorce today. Legally speaking, there's not much stopping me. But before I do, I want you both to consider if the path you're on is truly what you want, or if you're just trying to escape the hurt without giving yourselves a chance to heal it. At that moment, time felt suspended. My attorney stared at the floor, perhaps uncomfortable with the judge's personal approach. Patricia stood rigid, her lips pressed in a thin line, but she didn't object. Judge Williams continued, I won't force you into therapy, but I am offering you an option. I can adjourn this case for 90 days. During that time, if you wish, you can seek counseling, attempt mediation, anything that might let you see each other not as enemies, but as two people who once cared deeply. If after those 90 days you still believe divorce is the only solution, come back and I'll sign the papers. But if you find even a glimmer of that love you just spoke about, maybe you won't need me. I was speechless. The entire courtroom remained still, the weight of his words pressing down on us. The unexpected nature of this gesture, his empathy shining through the formalities, took everyone by surprise. For the first time in months, I felt the faintest spark of hope, and it terrified me. I wasn't sure if Rachel felt the same. I looked at her, and she looked back, tearful, uncertain, and maybe, just maybe, willing to consider the judge's offer. With a firm rap of his gavel, Judge Williams stood. I'm granting the adjournment, he declared. Speak with your lawyers if you must, but I strongly suggest you speak to each other first. He walked out, leaving the rest of us in stunned silence. The bailiff called the next case, and we were ushered out into the hallway. Patricia started to protest that Rachel deserved a swift resolution, but Rachel held up a hand to silence her. George fumbled with his briefcase, clearly unsure if he should start scheduling something or just wait for my cue. Meanwhile, Rachel and I just stood there, a few feet apart, the busy corridor streaming around us like a river around two stones. Finally, I mustered the courage to speak. What do you think? I asked quietly. She clutched the manila folder against her chest as if it were armor. I don't know, she admitted, tears slipping down her cheeks. I don't want more fighting, Ethan. I felt a painful lump in my throat. Neither do I said. But maybe we can try to talk without the lawyers, just to see if there's anything left worth saving. I didn't know if I meant it as a last-ditch effort to avoid regret, or if I truly wanted to attempt reconciliation. My emotions were a tangled mess, but the judge's words had ignited something in me, an awareness that maybe we had forgotten what once made us so strong. Rachel sniffled and nodded, wiping her cheeks. Okay, she whispered. We can try. We walked out of the courthouse together, ignoring the questioning looks from our lawyers. The morning sun felt almost blinding after the dimly lit interior. We decided to get coffee at a small cafe around the corner, ironically the same place where we'd met for lunch a couple of times during our happier years. We found a table in the back, away from the hustle and bustle, and for the first time in what felt like forever, we sat down as two human beings instead of adversaries. The conversation started awkwardly, like two acquaintances catching up after a long absence. We asked each other about work, about family, about little things we used to share so effortlessly. Eventually, we steered into deeper territory, how we both felt inadequate, how we'd let resentment fester, how we missed the comfort of simple companionship. Rachel admitted she might have projected her anxiety and insecurities onto me, expecting me to fix them. I admitted that I'd shut down emotionally, too proud or too scared to show her my own vulnerabilities. The tears flowed freely from both of us, and for once, we didn't try to hide them. The next day, with the judge's words echoing in our heads, we scheduled a session with a marriage counselor. Her name was Dr. Ramirez, and she specialized in couples on the brink of divorce. We walked into her office like two wounded soldiers, battered by the battles we'd waged against each other. Dr. Ramirez had us do the same exercise Judge Williams had asked us to do, list things we appreciated about each other, times when we felt most loved. It was a painful exercise because it forced us to confront the stark contrast between past tenderness and current hostility. But it also reminded us that there was once a genuine bond there, not just a legal agreement. Week by week, we unpacked our baggage in that therapy. We talked about the lost job, the fear of financial instability, how that fear had quietly poisoned our communication. We revisited the fights, dissecting the words we hurled at each other, trying to find the real emotions beneath them. We learned about attachment styles, triggers, all those psychological concepts that explained why we responded to stress in such destructive ways. For the first time, I felt like I was learning who Rachel really was beneath her anxious exterior, and she was discovering the emotional wounds I carried from my own upbringing. It wasn't a smooth road. We had sessions where we left angrier than we arrived, accusing each other of not trying hard enough. More than once, I questioned if we were prolonging the inevitable. But each time we considered giving up, we remembered the judge's offer. He'd finalize the divorce after 90 days if that was truly what we wanted. Something about having a set time frame pushed us to keep trying. as if we were racing an emotional clock. Somewhere along the line, though, I noticed subtle changes. We started sitting together on the couch to watch a movie or share a meal at home. We began to laugh at old inside jokes, albeit carefully, like we were testing the waters. One evening, after a particularly emotional therapy session, Rachel reached for my hand, and I let her hold it. We just sat there in silence, her hand in mine, realizing we hadn't done that in months. My heart felt heavy, yet strangely light at the same time, as if it remembered how to beat in tandem with hers. As the 90-day mark approached, we had a frank discussion in Dr. Ramirez's office about what we really wanted. Neither of us said the word divorce that day. Instead, we talked about building a new foundation, acknowledging that we couldn't go back to the people we were before, but maybe we could move forward as something wiser, more resilient. Rachel admitted she still loved, but she was terrified of slipping back into old patterns. I admitted the same. Dr. Ramirez told us that fear was normal, that it was actually a sign we valued our relationship enough to worry about losing it again. We walked into the courthouse hand in hand on the day we were supposed to finalize the divorce. Judge Williams looked up from his papers, and for the first time, I saw a faint smile tug at the corner of his mouth. "Well," he said, "this is unexpected." Patricia and George were there, but neither seemed to object when we explained we wanted to withdraw the petition. I could see relief in George's eyes, maybe because he preferred a less adversarial outcome. Patricia simply nodded. Perhaps she wasn't used to seeing couples actually reconcile. Judge Williams nodded thoughtfully. "Sometimes," he said, "it takes looking at the brink of an ending to realize you still want a future together. I wish you both luck. Please don't waste the second chance you're giving each other." He signed a document acknowledging the dismissal of the case. With a final rap of the gavel, it was over. Not our marriage, but the storm that had threatened to tear us apart. We left that courtroom feeling dazed, like we had just stepped off a roller coaster. Did everything magically become perfect after that? Of course not. We still had plenty of issues to work through, and we stayed in therapy for months, but something had shifted fundamentally. We'd been forced to confront the worst versions of ourselves, and we chose to fight those versions rather than each other. The judge's unexpected exercise, asking us to recall what we loved about each other, became a touchstone. Whenever we felt ourselves slipping into old habits, we'd remind each other of those qualities, that core decency and kindness that got buried under layers of resentment. It's been 2 years since then. We still have our spats, still annoy each other sometimes, but we've learned to communicate in ways that don't tear us down. We've even talked again about starting a family or maybe fostering a child in need. The idea doesn't terrify us the way it used to. We realize that if we could survive this ordeal, being inches away from a legal bitter end, maybe we have a fighting chance at the bigger challenges life might throw at us. Sometimes I think back to that final day in court. I remember how I was so certain it was over, how ready I was to sign the papers and move on with my life. And then one man's simple question, "Tell me one thing you loved about your spouse," cut through all the layers of anger and bitterness, forcing me to see Rachel not as an adversary, but as the woman who had once laughed with me under a summer's sun, who had once held my hand when I felt anxious, who had once been my partner in every sense of the word. That question changed everything. It was like a key turning in a lock I didn't even know was still there. I don't know if every couple in trouble has a moment like that, a moment where someone forces them to remember why they chose each other in the first place. But for us, it was enough. It made us realize that maybe we weren't done fighting for each other. Maybe we'd just forgotten how to try. And that's what I would tell anyone who's on the brink of throwing in the towel. Sometimes the person you once loved is still there, buried beneath the rubble of misunderstandings and hurt feelings. It might take a single sentence from someone on the outside, a judge, a friend, a stranger, to make you see it. So that's how our divorce ended up never happening. It wasn't some grand romantic gesture or a lightning bolt of realization. It was a quiet question that forced us to remember our shared humanity. I'll never forget the look on Rachel's face in that moment. It was like she was seeing me and letting me see her in return, without the scars or the anger, just the faint echo of that laughter that had once defined us. We left that courtroom feeling raw and uncertain, but also oddly hopeful. And here we are, 2 years later, giving it a real chance. If you'd told me back then that a judge could say something so unexpected that it would stop a divorce in its tracks, I'd have laughed you out of the room. But that's exactly what happened. Sometimes, all it takes is a gentle nudge from a stranger in a robe to remind you what you're losing, or perhaps to remind you what you still have left to fight for.